Yeah, it's a tie for second place between GOP presidential hopefuls Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis.
According to a new poll, Ramaswamy has hit double digits for the first time, but the poll is also one of the poorest showings for DeSantis. What does this mean for the state of the race as we're 1 month away, thereabouts, from candidates taking the stage for the first debate? Joining us now, Fox News contributor, the Washington Times opinion editor, Charlie Hurt, Southside Virginia, king, or maybe Amen. Prince, your brother's the king. Charlie, good to see you. So is Ron DeSantis moving down in the polls, or is Vivek Ramaswamy moving up?
I think it's a little bit of both. And we've talked a little bit about this before. It's sort of amusing to sit back and look now at the state of the race after, 6-8 months of all the experts saying that, oh, you're going to love DeSantis. DeSantis is going to be the person that storms the field, knocks Trump out, takes over, and will be sort of Trump without Trump. And of course, then voters check in, and voters are not feeling this. And the experts, yet again, got it all wrong. What the experts didn't predict was a guy like Vivek Ramaswamy who comes along. People really like him. And the more people, his name ID is still very low, but the more people hear from him, they like him. And what's I think is most interesting about him is where he is top on the list is people's second choice. In a recent poll, he wound up getting a majority, a 51% majority of people who pick him as their second choice, which means he's not ticking anybody off. So that if somebody their first choice is Trump, their second choice is Vivek, or even if their first choice is DeSantis, their second choice is Vivek. And he's done it with this very positive message. And he's leaned into this America First thing. He's not sort of flinching from it, and it's paying huge dividends for him right now.
Charlie, here's my theory. In politics, you have people who are in the lead, and they become very cautious, and they don't want to offend anybody in the middle or on the right or on the left, and they become very vanilla. Where when Vivek's at 1% of the polling, he's been out there throwing heat on every issue. He's telling you what he thinks. What he's going to do to fix issues, whether it's ESG, January 6th, getting rid of the Department of Education. I mean, the list goes on. He's a thought leader, and he's not afraid of offending anybody. And what happens is people end up loving him. This is the Donald Trump model. No one talked about securing the border and building a wall and making Mexico pay for it. Donald Trump said it. People thought he was crazy, and then all of a sudden people are chanting, build the wall.
Yeah, there's a real liberation to having nothing to lose. And Vivek is running like that. And if you talk to his team and you talk to him, you can tell he's really enjoying it, too, which is also really important. And we did an ed board with him. The Washington Times did an ed board with him this week. And I asked him what his favorite thing about campaigning was. And I was sort of surprised. He said that his favorite thing about campaigning is actually being in a room with these voters and having these conversations, these very honest, open conversations at the end of a rally or whatever that you never would have expected at the beginning, meaning that people wind up being very honest in these interactions with voters. And that, to me, tells you he's somebody who likes people. Mm-hmm. And this idea, we always want to drop in Mike Bloomberg or somebody else who doesn't like people, is terrible with people, and we think they're going to wind up being president. No, you have to actually like people. And Vivek Ramaswamy likes people.
Yeah, Mike Bloomberg, you meet him, and you try to shake his hand, and he looks at you like you just picked up after your dog with your bare hand. That's how he treats elitists. So I completely...
but this is what... He thinks that you work for him. So when he meets a voter, he's like, please go get my suit, go get my shoes. Why aren't you shining my shoes? And it just doesn't work.
Where's my
this
dry
is not how politics works.
Where's my dry cleaning, you please?
Exactly.
But Charlie, we talked about Republicans. Let's talk about Democrats, because there is panic in the Democrat Party that there could be a third-party candidate that could threaten Joe Biden's reelection. Take a look at this poll showing the willingness of nearly half of American voters neither want to vote for a Republican nor a Democrat, or they're willing to vote for somebody else. That is a remarkable number, which means Joe Biden is in danger. But also, if there's a third-party candidate that's a conservative, the Republican nominee could be in danger, because it seems like the American electorate is dissatisfied with all of their choices.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think the danger is a little bit more for Democrats for one reason. Just because Republicans for 12 years now have been going through this Tea Party movement, and then Donald Trump, who I would argue is a third-party candidate. I mean, the first thing Donald Trump did when he came on the scene was he beat all the Republicans, and then once he did a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, he then went after Hillary Clinton and then took over that as well. The Democrats have managed to keep it together, to keep their corps together and not go through this. So their vote, and we see it with RFK Jr., their voters are dying for somebody different, an outsider, and they keep getting the same corpses like the president, Joe Biden. And it's not working. People don't like him. They don't want him, or they get a Kamala Harris. And so I think that there's a they're trying to sort of keep this thing together as best they can, and that's why they went with Joe Biden in 2020. But I think the seams are it's going to come apart at the seams for Democrats, because they have not addressed this problem, which is they don't like the party, they don't like the establishment, and they want something different. And it's why, at the end of the day, if Republicans go with Donald Trump, I think Donald Trump wins.
I think you're right. And by the way, if Joe Biden won't debate, RFK has to threaten a third-party candidacy if he doesn't debate, and Joe Biden will show up on stage.
And we were showing Cornel West in that graphic, and both of those men, third party or not, are incredible speakers. And Cornel West, an incredible thinker, off the cuff, and 2/3 of voters think Joe Biden is too old for a second term. Period. End of story. We've got to jump, Charlie.
And a Cornel West or an RFK Jr. would do more to eat into Trump voters than Biden ever would.
Pig farmer and political analyst Charlie Hurt, thank you for joining us.
He's not a farmer. He just happens to have some hogs.
Oh, come on. Give him a break.
That's not
a failed
a
farmer.
I'll call you a pig farmer.
Just because you have a redneck doesn't mean that you actually farm, Charlie. Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.